Rivian is a fine truck. A plethora of tests have been recently published in print and video. The jury is in that the Rivian is a superb truck both on and off-road. Plenty of torque, power, and four-wheel drive capability have been demonstrated. Well, you know, the Ram Power Wagon and Jeep Gladiator, thanks to front and rear locking differentials, could go anywhere the Rivian does just as easily and keep around $14,000 in your pocket. Although you'll be contributing to CO2, and raising global temperatures will be your own little part in contributing to global warming. But, you know, the USA only contributes 15% to the total world CO2 pollution. You'd think we'd have something better to do than obsess about our CO2 output. Oh yeah, did you know that October 1st, New York Times, in filings to Securities and Exchange Commission, Rivian said it had lost $2 billion since the start of last year. And by the way, what's wrong with your pictures? As far as the pictures go, because of copyright restrictions, I had to take my own pictures. Problem is, my camera sees into the soul of whatever it's aimed at.
So let's take an objective look at some of the specs and philosophies that define the Rivian compared to other four-wheel drive pickups, based on reactions in recent video and published tests. Speed is one of the first things mentioned about the Rivian with its 3 second or so 0 to 60 performance. I'm the wrong person to ask about speed. When I'm in the backcountry, I really don't even want to go fast. I'm out there to enjoy the countryside, spend some time in it, and just have some nice tame driving, you know, taking it easy on my vehicle. And this comes from somebody that used to pit for off-road racing. But I also lost all interest in fast machines until we discovered fast boats. And over the years, ended up with 4 trophies from the Catalina ski race. And that boat has the right kind of horsepower for warming the globe, 16 cylinders at a time. Show you a few more clips of that, and then we'll move on to some more serious technical discussion on the Rivian. So we're going to take a little while to talk about torque, because there's a lot of bovine excrement being circulated and getting excited about with these electric vehicle torque numbers, such as the video link shown here. The girl reporter at 3 minutes and 30 seconds in it gets pretty hysterical about the torque rating on the Rivian, and she's not even wrong. So The numbers she refers to are motor torque. They're in the same class as a lot of other EVs out there. As far as I know, most of them all have gearing between the motors and the wheels. And most EVs are running around 10,000 foot-pounds, all summed up for all four wheels and gear ratios and whatnot. The Hummer, for example, just comes out and says 11,500. And so I thought we should compare EV torque and ICE torque, but I want to compare them at crawl speeds, down in the regime where controllability and the ability to crawl and slow crawling, rock crawling, four-wheel drive can be important. But there's some interesting things about these torque numbers. For example, the typical axle shafts in the Jeep are rated roughly right around 4,000 foot-pounds of torque on each shaft. So you've got enough torque on these vehicles to break those shafts. And even 3/4 and 1-ton vehicle shafts are only rated around 8,000 foot-pounds. So what you're going to find out is that these vehicles all have the capability of developing enough torque to hurt themselves. But that assumes you can get all that torque through one of those axles at a time, and the driver abuses the throttle enough to break the axle. So what we're going to do is we're also going to compare several vehicles. I've got my custom built Jeep rock crawler that I'm going to use as one example. We're going to compare that to the Jeep Wrangler Rubicon with the Hemi V8 and to EVs. And I've kind of generalized the EVs around 10,000 foot-pounds of torque. The Jeep Wrangler and my Jeep, which has a Ford 5.8 liter V8 from 1996, are all based on the actual torque curves of those engines and the transmissions that they're equipped with. So we'll be getting into some detail on exactly how these torque numbers are arrived at and how they work in the real world. One of the vehicles I'm going to use as part of the technical comparison we're about to do is the Jeep that I built in 1996, which is a 1989 Jeep YJ, and it's equipped with a 5.8 liter Ford truck engine. This engine was actually purchased brand new in 1997 for installation in this Jeep. And again, it's a Ford 5.8 liter truck engine, bone stock the way it would have been in the Ford truck. A little bit of difference in the air intake just because of the different vehicle, but it's got all the emission stuff, and so its horsepower and torque curves would be identical to the published ones that I found in the curve. So in its era, we built this Jeep with Dana 44 axles. Back in 96, they were considered the strength and forward on the YJ. As the years went by with the heavy rock crawling, everybody moved to Dana 60s. But the main thing we're concerned with here is the fact that they're filled with 538 gears, which is pretty low. And as we move back from the engine, we see an NV 4500 transmission, which has a 5.6 to 1 low range first gear and a 0.7 to 1 overdrive. So it's got the granny low gear, 5.6 to 1. And by the way, you have a Ford engine, there's Chevrolet clutch in here, and that's the Dodge version of the NV 4500 transmission. So we got 538 in the differentials, we got 5.6 in the transmission. And the transfer case is an Advanced Adapters Atlas transfer case with the 4.3 to 1 low range. And it's got the dual levers where you can shift the front in or out and the rear in or out, both of which completely independently, and you can switch them to low range. You can switch them out, high range or low range, on each of the front and rear output individually. So that's the transfer case. So that takes into account all the gearing, including the rear Dana 44 axle. But we're setting the stage here for the type of equipment that we're going to be comparing to an electric 4x4 and to the bone stock Wrangler
that's been recently offered with the V8 engine.
So here's the data that we used to roll up all the gearing calculations for the Rubicon as well as the Jeep that I built. And the Jeep that I built has a manual transmission. So you've got a total compound ratio in first gear low range of 129, I'll bet 130 to 1. And on the Rubicon, which again, this is a manual transmission on my Jeep. The Rubicon is an automatic transmission. And when you roll up the gear ratios on the Rubicon, you end up with almost 48 to 1 ratio. Now, the reason I show a 95.6 here is it's generally considered that the torque converter in an automatic transmission offers another 2 to 1 reduction, which is mostly at play in a stalled situation where the vehicle is just starting to move or not moving. Even if you put the brakes on and floor the accelerator, you're getting the torque multiplication of the torque converter. So it's a valid number, but its use is only right there at the bottom end. So this rolls up all the gearing of the Rubicon and the Jeep. And as we know, the EVs are about 10 to 1 typically. So when we plot the torque output versus speed for all of these various combinations, and remember, we're only plotting up to about 10 or 12 feet per second, which is about 6 or 7 miles per hour. And in this region, the torque curve of the electric motor is flat. Yeah, they're not flat as you get up to the higher speeds, but in this region right here, they're about as flat as a pancake. And in fact, you know, the Hummer would probably be up here at 11.5. But it's flat at 10,000 foot-pounds. Now, that's a good number. That's a good, strong number at these slow speeds, and it's going to give some pretty decent performance. But the blue curve is the Jeep that I built with the Ford V8, and it has a torque peak of over 30,000 foot-pounds, and yeah, it can break axle shafts and has done it if you don't drive it prudently. And here you can see a shift from first to second transmission showing a drop-off in torque, but it's still remaining pretty high. Now the Rubicon has the interesting part where the torque converter comes into play right off of the starting when you're basically stalled, and then very quickly drops back into the effect of the normal gearing. But still, the electric vehicles don't these are all good, and the ICE ones are much lower geared, but they're all going to perform really good on the trail. But there's no big advantage of torque for the electric vehicles in this regime. Another interesting thing to look at is RPM versus speed. Now this might play out in the actual controllability of the vehicles, and you'll notice that the Jeep with the Ford engine and the Rubicon gather speed and much slower than the electric vehicle does. And that could be argued that it makes the electric vehicle maybe slightly less controllable in crawling, but when you see the videos of the vehicle, it's certainly not a problem. And over the years, I've owned vehicles with shitty ICE torque ratings that you did pretty good with. So, you know, maybe comparing apples to oranges, but this isn't shit to brag about on the EVs. This is just to show the torque curve of the Ford V8 that I used to generate the numbers and where I got the torque data for the 6.4 Hemi in the Wrangler. So the Rivian website has a lot of environmental and carbon fuel related comments and things on its website. And I wanted to speak about that for a little bit. One of the first things I want to talk about is fuel, because from Rivian's website, quote, "On our current path, we will fully exhaust this stored energy in only a few generations." And this is like the latest person to come along in my life spouting this stuff. And I've been hearing this stuff since the early 1970s. In fact, quoting Smokey Yunick, popular mechanic of that era, who says that there were going to be out of hydrocarbon fuels, and you and your children will never have enough hydrocarbon fuel ever again, in spite of everything the world may, whatever, blah, blah, blah. So, how's it going, children? You're the children. I don't see you guys hurting for fuel. And Jimmy Carter warned us back in the era between 77 to 81 with their moral equivalent of war as how he was going to deal with the energy issue. And we now believe in the early 1980s the world will be demanding more oil than it can produce. Sometime in the 1980s, production will go up until then, but can't go up much more. And within 10 years, not be able to import enough oil. That would be 1991. May 72, supplies last 20 years. 1977, peak in early part of the 21st century, or peak in the early 1990s. And by the early part, must face the prospect of running out. And 1980, peak oil production for 2000. And it dropped to zero by over about 20 years. That's 2020. My generation has been listening to this garbage all these years. So why should I listen to people saying this stuff now? How long does it take before you realize that people who think they're experts aren't? Now, there's also the environmentalist part of Rivian. In fact, quoting their CEO, he talks about liking to hike and mountain bike, but is aware that driving up to the trails was polluting the environment. Okay, yeah, your fuel polluted the environment. Did you ever realize that your sound is polluting the environment, and the need to create a trail and the tires and the action on the ground is also damaging the terrain, and you're impairing the quality of any non-motorized human and wildlife activity experience up there? Good off-road capabilities don't compensate. The only way to leave nature as it is don't go there at all in a vehicle. In short, take a hike. Several of the test videos that had been done on the Rivian were passing on a lot of the environmental philosophy. And in fact, Rivian also has reached an agreement with the Nature Conservancy to provide the illusion of being a, avid environmentalist. The reality of environmentalism is this. The best examples of environmentalism, real serious hardcore environmentalism, that really wants to protect the environment is the Sierra Club and Friends of the Earth, who've been fighting for years for total elimination of motorized recreation from public land. And I'm sorry, but until Rivian's either for or against that philosophy, and anything else is hypocritical. And the Rivian environment is gotten so heavy on their website that it reaches a point where it's difficult to take it seriously. What about me? Why am I qualified to comment on all of the things I've commented here, aside from four-wheeling for 38 years? And I realize a lot of you younger people will only feel contempt for my experience, but I've been in it for a while. Built a couple of Jeeps, I actually built a couple of pickups too. Authored 10 four-wheeling adventure articles. I can provide scanned copies of them to anybody that wants to see them. I don't think you can find them anymore. These magazines have been defunct for a while. Also still have the 77 Bronco that I built. EFI engine, modified, blah, blah, blah. All the, by the way, Detroit lockers front and rear in all my vehicles, although my Dodge Power Wagon has the factory stock electric lockers front and rear. But full locking diffs front and rear put vehicles into a unique class. And this is just to show the article on our first Jeep, which was a throttle body injected Ford V8. We were among the pioneers of putting fuel injected engines in previously carbureted vehicles. And this was back in the 1980s. And then in the 1990s, we moved up to multi-point fuel injection in the Jeeps that we build. And if anybody wants details, I got copies of the articles. They're from way back. And this is a cover photo that I got in 1998 on one of the travel and adventure articles that I did. That is our Jeep, the white one back there in the picture.